Cherry does a good job of talking about how to prepare for the Christian funeral. Here are some of my thoughts to add to that. I went to a funeral a few years ago, and it was about a friend. He was a fighter pilot, and the priest was talking about this gentleman, and he said every time, gave his name, we're going to call him, let's call him Larry. Every time Larry was in the cockpit, I know that he was talking to God, and he was looking out and marveling at the wonder and the beauty of the world and the amazing magnitude of. No, he wasn't. That's not at all with this guy. And the guy, had me going on this service. It was a really nice service until he started his sermon and started talking about this guy. And it was totally not him. And you kind of go, did you ever meet him? Like alive? And I doubt it. And it really kind of made the whole thing a little bit more difficult. So I think for me, the first thing is when you're planning a funeral, do what you can to get to know the person. If the person has already passed, then you need to talk to the family and friends and find out as much as you can about who this life is that you're celebrating. Every life is worth celebrating. I've given you a handout of some things that you can use to help you, some guiding questions. And on that resource list, I've also said what you might do to prepare for the service itself, and then some things you can do for follow-up. So I invite you to check out that resource. It's been posted on Moodle. One thing I'd like to reiterate from what Cherry said is on page 66, when she talks about to evangelize or not to evangelize. I agree. Let the funeral be the funeral. Don't turn this into an evangelistic enterprise, and for heaven's sake, don't do an altar call. Let the life speak for itself. Let the sharing of faith that happens there, let that speak for itself. And it is very fitting to say, here is how we have found God through this person's life. This is where I saw the action of God. As I was finding out more about this person's life, I started noticing how God had, and so forth. Don't make it up like the guy in the cockpit. Don't make it up. There is nothing more fitting, she says, than the community sharing its faith during the time of death. That will impact unbelievers or those who are weak in faith to draw closer to Christ. And certainly you can invite and say, if you'd like to know more about this kind of faith that this person had that was described here today, why don't you give me a call later? And surprisingly, the people really will call. And it is a very helpful thing that way. One thing that we're dealing with is how to do a funeral in COVID times. There are a lot of folks that are opting for graveside services, and also videos being streamed via Zoom or the website or Facebook, and those make it a lot easier to have services and to celebrate lives. A lot of people are choosing to have private services and then planning on having the larger memorial services at a later time. Talk to the folks in your community and see what feels right for you. On page 70, Cherry talks about open or closed casket. I have very strong feelings about this personally. I agree that open casket during public visitations helps a lot. It really, really does. It helps give the people closure, but once the casket is closed, it stays closed. Don't open it back up again. For the funeral service itself, I strongly feel that the casket needs to be closed. Very tough to be talking about resurrection and how their soul's with the Lord, and they're looking, going, no, I don't think so. I think they're lying right there. I'm looking at them. It pretty much undoes what you do, and to open it later undoes what you do. Now, if that is your practice where you are, You may have to live with it. It's a terrible practice. And don't let the mortuaries say, oh no, this is something you need to do. No, it isn't something you need to do. Encourage them to leave the casket closed and tell them why. And for the Lord's sake, do not, under any circumstances, ever open it up at the cemetery. Ever. Seriously. That's devastating. There's no reason to devastate people. The next thing that she talks about are rites of fraternal orders. A lot of folks are Masons, and where we live, they do that following the service itself, where they're right in the sanctuary. You've said your benediction, and the Masons do their part. That was the tradition in a couple of the towns that I was in. And in fact, I think it's been the tradition about it anywhere. Sometimes they do it at the gravesite, but sometimes they do it inside. It's just not a part of the service itself. That's a little bit different than what Cherry says. Frankly, incorporating the rites into the committal is the easiest and most effective. And if they're military honors are always at the graveside, unless, of course, it's some extenuating circumstance and there will not be a burial there. Perhaps burial is at a distance. Then I have seen that done again after the benediction, where they will fold the flag at that point. But the mortuary is your friend. They will really be very helpful in guiding you through it, guiding the family through it, and helping you to guide the family through it. She lifts the question of Holy Communion or no. I have never seen communion taken at a funeral where I am. But again, this is part of what is the custom where you are from. I think it presents a difficulty because you have a lot of faith traditions there. People that are comfortable taking communion, people that aren't, people that don't know how to take communion at that place. What is your practice? It raises a level of concern a little bit. Mostly, some of them come from different traditions where there may not be an open table. And so in order to respond to the real grief that is going on there, sometimes that's not really the best practice for that time. When you meet with the family, make sure that you get not only your questions answered, make sure you get the answers to the others who are depending on you. For example, if your church serves a dinner afterwards, they need to know how many to prepare for. You're going to want to make sure that you're clear about whether they serve this for everyone who is in attendance or family only, whether it is more of a coffee and cookies kind of reception, or if it is a full meal. Find out that first, and then you'll do them a favor by finding out approximately how many to plan on and get that message back to the people that are waiting to hear that. Also, you're going to want to find out if they want music and what kind, so that if there are other people that are participating in the service, you can ask them what musicians might they want. Do they want an organist? Do they want a soloist? You're going to need to try to secure those folks. And so find out what you need. Make sure that on the day of the funeral you arrive at the funeral home, if it's there, or at the church in plenty of time to set up, have the lights on, things are ready, the heat or the air conditioning is on, prior to when the family arrives. You want to be there at least a half an hour before. 45 minutes to an hour is not unreasonable. Do attend the dinner afterwards if you can. It's a wonderful time to build relationships with the extended family and let them know that you care about them. Make follow-up calls on the family Again, in your handout, I've described a good way of doing that and some good resources for doing that. StephenMinistries.org and GriefShare.org are two fantastic resources for those in grief. One of the things that Cherry talks about is exceptionally difficult circumstances. There is no more difficult circumstance than a suicide. And a lot of people have lots of questions on that. People will tell them the person cannot go to heaven if they've committed suicide. I completely disagree with that. I think there are lots of scriptures that would lead me to my belief on that. We certainly can't know for sure what a person's heart was saying at that point. All we know is that sometimes depression is a fatal disease, a fatal illness. Sometimes we know that when you're ready to give up, the thought of being in the arms of your eternal Father sounds awfully appealing when you don't think you can go on anymore or take any more of the mental or physical pain. One thing that I think is helpful, I mentioned about reasons why I think that this is true, is if a person were laying down their life for someone, we would call them a hero, not someone who has an unpardonable sin. What is needed is care and compassion and extending Christ's love to those who are bewildered, anguished, don't know which end is up, and need the love of God more than anyone else. Offer that. One question that will always come up is, will you do my funeral? Daughter, son, niece, grandma. The answer is no. Don't try it. Please don't try it. It is extraordinarily hard to do the funeral for a family member. It keeps you from grieving. It keeps you separated from your family, and you need them right then. It is really hard. You can speak, you can have a part of it, but don't be the one who is leading the service. It really prevents you from your grieving. And don't be afraid to cry. Don't be afraid to let them know that this person's life touched you and that you miss them as well. Jesus wept, remember? Go to him together.